Hello everyone, it's Jen from Old Tinker Studio. In this tutorial, we will be learning about the cameras and rendering in Blender 2.83. So let's get on with the tutorial. There are three camera types available in Blender: perspective, orthographic, and panoramic. We will only be looking at the first two in this tutorial. Let's start by looking at the basic camera that is part of the default scene. Note, use the 0 on the numpad to view the scene through the camera. Under the Properties panel, which you can get to by N, you can lock the camera to view. This way you can move the scene without moving the camera. If we select the camera and go into the Object Properties tab, we can access the properties associated with the camera. There are three types of lenses: perspective, orthographic, and panoramic. The perspective lens is the default camera lens. This type of camera shows the objects as they would appear in real life. Objects in the distance will appear smaller than the objects in the foreground. The focal length controls the amount of zoom, meaning the amount of the scene which is visible. Shorter focal lengths will yet allow you to see more of the scene. The lens unit allows you to set the focal length either in terms of millimeters or a field of view, which is the angle of the view. Shift allows for the adjustment of vanishing points, which is the position where parallel lines converge. Clip is the interval in which objects are directly visible. Anything outside the clip end will not be visible in the camera. Depth of field refers to the distance between the nearest and farthest objects, which helps to determine the sharpness or blurriness of an object. Focus object allows you to choose an object that will determine the focal points. The focal distance sets the distance to the focal point where no focus object is specified. The f-stop defines the amount of blur. Lower values mean a stronger depth of field. If we choose the f-stop of 0.2, notice how blurry the scene becomes. If we choose the cone for the focus object, we can now see the cone much clearer. And if we change the focus distance to 5, both objects become very blurry. The blade's rotation and ratio properties are not going to be covered as they are a bit too in-depth for this beginner's tutorial. The sensor fit option controls which dimension, vertical or horizontal, along which the field of view the angle fits. The sensor size is an alternative way to control the focal length. This is used most often when you're trying to catch a real-world example. When using the orthographic camera, perspective objects will appear their actual size, regardless of the distance. The orthographic camera has an orthographic scale instead of a focal length and lens unit. The orthographic scale controls the apparent size of the objects. The topic of rendering is a vast topic, so I'll just briefly mention it in this beginner's tutorial. The render options are under the render menu in the header. You can render an image or an animation. Now, just a few notes about the Eevee render engine, which is the default engine in 2.8. Bounce lighting in the Eevee render engine is not automatic. Under the Render Properties tab, you need to enable the Screen Space Reflections option. Shadows will also be very rough because Eevee doesn't have proper ray tracing. This can be resolved by selecting the Light and adjusting the Shadow Properties or Softness under the Light tab. A better method is to enable the soft shadows under the shadow sections of the render property and then adjust the size of the light. Often the shadow of the mesh that is closest to the floor doesn't have a natural looking shadow in Eevee. This can be solved by selecting the light and enabling contact shadows. And then you can adjust the available options such as distance or softness. This is the last Blender 2.83 Basics tutorial. You can check out my other videos for more in-depth tutorials. If you have a request for a tutorial or a question about Blender, please feel free to leave a comment. If you're interested in learning more about 3D art and animation, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.